Warning, November's term limits referendum in Arkansas is another politician-led scam. Hi, I'm Philip Blumel. Welcome to No Uncertain Terms, the official podcast of the term limits movement for the week of September 14, 2020.
Your sanctuary from partisan politics.
Yes, the headline is that Issue 2, if approved, would reduce term limits faced by Arkansas legislators from a ludicrous 16 years to a merely weak 12. Well, that sounds like an improvement, and it is, but that's not the whole story. Let's call in U.S. Term Limits Executive Director Nick Tomboulides and put all the facts on the table. We have a lot to talk about regarding Arkansas today. I want to start out with the news. There was a court decision in Arkansas regarding this term limits referendum that's going to be on the ballot in November in that state. And Tom Steele, term limits hero, he's the chairman of the Arkansas Term Limits Committee. He sued, saying that the ballot title did not describe in any way what the referendum does. And a judge decided just the other day that it doesn't have to. When a citizen's initiative makes it to the ballot, it has to stand up to very strict scrutiny of the ballot title. But according to the judge, a referral from the legislature for a referendum on the ballot does not have to live up to that same level of scrutiny, and therefore they let this pass. Now, let me read to you, if I can, the ballot title of this measure, okay? Issue number 2. A constitutional amendment to be known as the Arkansas Term Limits Amendment, and amending the term limits applicable to members of the General Assembly, period. That really doesn't tell the whole story, does it, Nick?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't tell the story that you're not really amending term limits. You're effectively eliminating the term limits that Arkansas has had for over 20 years. Because what is hidden, carefully concealed in this ballot measure is the fact that it will take away lifetime term limits in Arkansas. Arkansas's got no reentry. So if you term out of the legislature, you can never come back. That's in their state constitution. Right. They're trying to get rid of that and insert a consecutive term limit that would have a comeback clause. So this is basically the Lifetime Politicians Act. It was challenged in court because it didn't say that's what it did. And what we've learned about Arkansas courts in the last 10 years or so is that every lawsuit against term limits will always win. Every lawsuit for term limits will always lose. The courts in Arkansas are about as corrupt as the legislature. They deface the will of the people at every turn.
Right. Now, in order to get this lifetime opportunity, they are, quote unquote, giving the voters a little something. And that is reducing the term limit from an absurd 16 years, which is not a term limit. And we'll get into that. It's just simply, it has no effect, into a 12-year term limit, which is borderline. It's a weak term limit, usually one put on the ballot by politicians, not by the people, as in this case.
The devil's always in the details, right?
That's it.
So I read this and I was looking at it and I found a little tiny provision in there that caught my eye. And It said, the change in term limits from 16 to 12, which, look, we applaud. Obviously, lower is better with term limits. We like 12 more than 16. We like 8 more than 12. We like 6 more than 8. We like getting rid of politicians entirely more than 6. No, just kidding. So hidden in this amendment is a little provision that says legislators who took office or who were elected before January 2021 are not subject to the new 12-year term limit. They still get to stay for 16 years. What that means is, if you're on the ballot this November in Arkansas, if you get elected to the legislature as a newbie, you can be in the legislature until 2036. But here's the crazy thing. They grandfather in the 16, but they don't grandfather in the lifetime, which means that not only do you get to stay till 2036, but then you can sit out 2 years and come back, and then you get to do another 12 years. So this is like one of the biggest scams we've ever seen, and that's saying a lot for Arkansas. It's enshrining the notion of career politician. It's not term limits, even in the slightest.
It isn't. It's a scam. And here's one thing I find really fascinating about this, too, is why they're doing it. Because if you think about it, they have it pretty good right now with these professional politicians with a 16-year term limit. Again, I don't even want to call it a term limit. That is essentially a lifetime, even though it's not technically. They could basically stay in a career with 16 years.
This is basically appeasement from the legislature. There have been people like Tom Steele in Arkansas who, for years now, have been fighting to restore the real term limits. I mean, there's a long history of this. In 1992, with an overwhelming supermajority of the vote, the people of Arkansas passed a clean, simple, effective lifetime term limit. 6 years in the House, 8 years in the Senate. That year, 1992, remember who was on the ballot? Bill Clinton. He was the hometown hero. He was the governor. Term limits got a higher percentage of the vote in Arkansas than Bill Clinton did in 1992.
Right. And it was a great amendment.
Yes, it was. It was the best in the country, tied with Michigan for being the best in the country. The legislature tried to take a whack at it in 2004. They tried to change it to 12 in the House, 12 in the Senate, 24 years total, but they failed. They failed because in 2004, they were too honest. They told the people exactly what that change would do, that it would essentially double term limits. So the people rejected it. Flash forward to 2014, they say, there's no way we can tell them the truth. If we tell the truth again, we're going to get screwed. The people are going to vote to retain term limits. So let's completely hoodwink, let's completely swindle the people of Arkansas with the most messed up amendment in the history of the United States. And they came up with this thing called the Arkansas Ethics, Transparency, and Financial Reform Amendment. Now, where the hell do you see term limits there? Ethics, transparency, and financial reform.
Oh, I think you can see it somewhere on like page 32 or something in small print.
Yeah, it is. Hidden in fine print in that amendment was taking the time-tested 6-year term limit in the House, 8-year term limit in the Senate, and giving all of these guys a 16-year overall term limit. And let me tell you, I would love to get in the face of the legislator who crafted that amendment, and I would love to yell at him, but I can't get to him right now, Phil, because he's in federal prison.
Oh, I see.
Federal prison for taking kickbacks and misusing state funds.
Right. Yep, heard that one before.
Hi, this is Scott Tillman, the National Field Director with U.S. Term Limits. We're nearing the end of election season. Over 300 congressional candidates have signed the U.S. Term Limits Pledge to co-sponsor and vote for the U.S. Term Limits Amendment of 3 House terms and 2 Senate terms, and no longer limit. But there are 2 ways to amend the Constitution. The states can initiate a Term Limits Amendment Convention. This requires state legislatures passing resolutions. There are 99 state legislatures in the 50 states, and there are over 7,300 state legislative seats in those legislatures. Almost 6,000 of those seats are up for election this November. We ask candidates for these seats to sign this pledge. I pledge that as a member of the state legislature, I will co-sponsor, vote for, and defend the resolution applying for an Article 5 convention for the sole purpose of enacting term limits on Congress. We have over 1,250 candidates for state legislature that have signed this pledge. Over 700 of those are up in the general election this November. But pledge season is not over. We're still collecting pledges from candidates and incumbents. Just this week, 25 new signers were added. You can follow us on Facebook to see all the recent signers in your state and to keep up with new term limits news. And you can contact us on Facebook and we'll connect with you and give you instructions about how to contact candidates in your area and ask those candidates to sign these term limit pledges. Help the movement by taking action to help us term limit Congress.
I even feel that U.S. term limits should stop listing Arkansas as a term limit state. Technically, of course, it has term limits on the books. But think about this, a little thought experiment before I go into some detail. If the Arkansas legislature passed a 100-year term limit, yeah, there'd be a term limit law on the books, but no one could possibly think that's a term limit that has any effect or any meaning, and we wouldn't call it such. What about 50 years? What about 20 years? At what point does a term limit have some effect? Well, I'll tell you what, 16 has no effect, and we can really, really see this. Back when Arkansas had its 6-year term limit in the House and 8 years in the Senate, they were a highly competitive state in terms of elections. You know, we just talked about in last week's podcast about Ballotpedia's competitiveness index for elections. Get this, Arkansas, a term limit state, was one of the least competitive states in the country. But go back 10 years before the 2014 term limit scam, it was one of the most competitive. Because back then, Arkansas had the same law as Michigan, which, by the way, was the number 1 most competitive state in 2020, was term limited Michigan. Arkansas used to be up there and have the same law. Now under this new 16-year law, Arkansas is at the bottom.
You know, like if I say I'm not going to eat more than 10,000 calories a day, am I on a diet?
Right,
if I say
exactly right.
you can't drive, if I say you can't drive more than 200 miles per hour, do I have a speed limit? And if I say, Arkansas legislators can stay 16 years in office, do you have a term limit?
That's right.
The answer is unequivocally no.
No.
I mean, it is a joke.
No.
It is a joke. It is something that only politicians could conceive of in their, twisted, self-serving brains. We've done polling on this. We've asked people, what do you think is the ideal term limit? And believe it or not, most people don't even think it's 6 or 8. A plurality of people believe 4 years is the ideal term limit.
I know.
So a 6-year term limit, an 8-year term limit, the most time-tested one that we see all over the country, the president has it, 36 governors. That's actually something of a compromise from what the people really want, because the people are so hardcore, they would go even shorter. But in those surveys, which are open-ended, that let people answer whatever their ideal term limit is, I think it's like 1% of people who say that the limit should be 16 years.
Right.
And all of those people are probably either legislators or friends of legislators or work in politics or work in government. So, it's sad to see democracy slipping away in Arkansas, but we're going to do everything we can as an organization to rectify it.
We sure will. You know why, specifically why these Arkansas legislators hate term limits so much, shows up in the stats. In 2010, according to Ballotpedia, the number of open seat elections in Arkansas legislative races was 45.3. That is to say, about half of all seats were open seat elections where you had competition, where anybody could run, where anybody could win. Now, after they put into law this insane 16-year term limit, the number of open seat elections in 2020 was 8.5% of the races in this November. 8.5. So from about half to less than 10% because of the change of this law. They do not have term limits in Arkansas. We got to change that.
Yeah. And, when are you going to get open seats again? 2036? 2034?
Yeah.
I mean, when is
16 years from 2014?
It's amazing. But there is a great group of patriots and fighters down in Arkansas who are challenging all of this sleaze and all of this corruption. Tom Steele, Paul Jacob, Bob Porto, and many others. Those are like the unsung heroes of Arkansas, the people who are trying to stand up and fix this.
That's right.
This is a public service announcement.
There's been a wide range of reactions to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's claim that she was set up when she was caught getting her hair done in a San Francisco beauty parlor during the lockdown. One of our favorites is from total nonstop action wrestler Tyrus, once known as Brodus Clay during his tenure with WWE. Tyrus appeared on Fox News last week and shared his solution to vintage arrogance in Washington, D.C.
You know what? When we see this in movies and stuff, or even when I catch my daughter doing something she's not supposed to do, and she's like, well, other kids made me do it, and they're a tattletale. And that's literally what happens. So no matter how long you're on this earth, how much wisdom you supposedly accrued as a leader of this country, basically when it all comes down to it, you a spoiled brat. And you're acting out and blaming everybody. Yeah. And the only way we can fix this is term limits. America, term limits. This is what happened when you let grandma and grandpa stay too long at the top.
It was a long, strange trip, but mayor term limits will be on the ballot in Warren, Michigan in November. Voters will be able to decide whether the mayor of their city should be limited to 3 terms, 12 years. This is a very weak limit. It's the kind that are usually put on the ballot by incumbent politicians themselves. And yes, this was the case here. The Warren City Council voted to put this idea on the ballot. But get this, the term limit for the mayor of Warren is currently 5 terms or 20 years. That's not a term limit at all. Nonetheless, it would cut short the ambitions of the mayor, Jim Fouts, now in his 4th term. Mayor Fouts actually vetoed this term limits question, but the council overrode it. So, Mayor Fouts had to turn to Plan B. Fortunately, Warren City Clerk Sonia Bofa failed to certify the question in time to meet a deadline and claimed, we can't put this on the general ballot in November where everybody votes. We'll have to wait to a future low turnout ballot like a March City Council primary election or something. Macomb County Clerk Fred Miller was on board. Well, it missed the deadline. And when the Warren Council sued, Macomb County Judge Edward Servito stood with Mayor Fouts. Thus, the local political establishment circled the wagons to protect the powerful incumbent. We've seen this movie before. But once the battle spread outside the Macomb County bubble, things changed quickly. An appeals panel ruled unanimously that the question should appear on the ballot. City Clerk Buffa, quote, had a clear legal duty to certify the ballot language to the Macomb County clerk, the panel wrote in a 7-page opinion. Desperate, the Fouts machine appealed to the Supreme Court, claiming the question would cause electoral chaos and calling for an emergency ruling. Well, they got it. We are not persuaded, the court wrote, without much elaboration. I mean, what else is there to say? Well, I got something to say. Local politicians will go to great lengths to retain their petty fiefdoms. Their legal machinations are often ludicrous, and they don't really expect people to be paying a lot of close attention at the local level. The clerk will often side with these incumbents. Don't be afraid to challenge them. And don't give up if you lose in a local court. Local judges often run in the same social circles as other movers and shakers in a municipality. An appeals court is much less likely to take such a provincial view. Lastly, and this is the great lesson of term limits activism, term limits are a simple and popular reform, beloved by the people, and when you fight, you win. So, fight. But also keep in mind that not every mayor is a self-centered weasel like Jim Fouts of Warren, Michigan. The county executive of Westchester, New York, George Latimer, signed a bill into law last month in that county that reduced his own term limit from a weak 12 years to a sturdy 8-year term limit. Latimer is a Democrat in his first term. He requested the change himself, and it was approved by the county lawmakers. He was quoted as saying, "It's a reasonable amount of time for you to have if you want to accomplish something. The clock is ticking, and so I think it creates a greater sense of urgency to accomplish things." Further, 8 years is more of a standard limit for an executive, he said, in line with the president and some governors around the U.S. The reduction will limit the accumulation of power in government, encourage fresh ideas, and prevent candidates from running with the political advantage of raising money as an incumbent, Latimer said. Good work, George. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of No Uncertain Terms. President Trump included past congressional term limits as one of his core priorities for his second term. Let's let him know that we support this idea and urge him to secure a vote on the U.S. Term Limits Amendment that is waiting for a hearing right now in the U.S. Senate. Go to termlimits.com/Trump and ask the president to break the logjam and get a vote on SJR 1. It'll take you 2 minutes. Even if you're skeptical about his commitment to this issue, let him know that. Dare him to prove you wrong by having a vote. That's termlimits.com/Trump. Thanks. We'll be back next week.
If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe and leave a review. The No Uncertain Terms podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and now Google Play.
USTL. Do you think that Arkansas is possibly more corrupt than Illinois? It's a tough one.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. At least from a term limits standpoint. Then again, Illinois never had term limits. So it's more bitter, I think, sometimes to have something great and lose it than to never have had it at all.